All right, everyone, welcome back to Dangerously Skip Permissions. I'm James. We've got Matt and a very special guest today, Kasey Klimes, the founder of Primitive. And Kasey, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for
Hello.
having me, guys. I'm excited for this.
So, Kasey, you said something in a group chat the other day that made me be like, I have to have a live conversation with you, which is, I forget exactly how you said it, but I think the gist of it was, it is easier to move fast as a single developer using AI than it is as a team, and that you sort of become obsessed with this problem. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem goes back really far, right? So working together as a team has always been a challenge. And I think the core, when I say team, I mean product teams in software. And the core challenge is to build great products. You need a diverse array of skills and backgrounds and experience, which therein lies the problem, which is you have a Tower of Babel situation almost from day one. And these, engineers and designers and PMs and all the other roles that have to come together to create something great don't all speak the same language, and they don't have the same mental models, and they don't have the same concerns. By design, like, we need them to have different concerns and mental models, but that inherently makes it really difficult to coordinate and collaborate. It makes it really easy to have miscommunication. And so, happy to get into the details of that, because I've spent a lot of my career on that particular problem well before agents arrived on the scene. But I do think agents have, in a sense, made it all even harder to do that. And part of that is that our systems have been built for single player developers using agents. They have not been built for teams. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that too. But what we're seeing at scale, what I'm seeing on the ground with teams every day, and there's now a bunch of research at scale showing what this looks like in the aggregate. There was Google did their Dora study recently, as they do. So Dora being like the kind of standard measurement of developer productivity. And they found, across the board, as you would expect, that developers are so much more productive than they were before coding agents hit the scene. And that includes code quality, that includes code, output, lines of code, right? And whatever, however you want to measure it, the individual productivity is way up. However, team throughput, the actual rate at which teams ship their product, in their survey was down 1.6% with the application of coding agents. Now, I don't know if this was done in like late 2025. Maybe things have changed a bit, but I think the bottom line is it's very clear that team output has not kept up with individual output. And so that sort of presents, at least on the surface, a bit of a paradox, right? Like, how can everyone on the team be so much more productive without the team becoming more productive? Why would that be like flatlined? I think you guys are familiar with Fred Brooks' Mythical Man Month. I think there's a coordination problem here, and we can think of it as the Mythical Agent Month. And what's ultimately happened is everyone on the team has leveled up as a manager of a bunch of reports that do not and cannot talk to each other the way that humans do. So coordination crisis and the coordination headwind is, when you think of it from that angle, it's almost a predictable result. And so I think that's what we're seeing on product teams right now. Everyone is moving so much faster, but they're not moving in the same direction. They don't have visibility into one another's work. And there's a whole bunch of downstream challenges to that is making product development in some ways harder than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is, I'm curious, like, the way that teams work together seems like it changes quite a bit at different sizes. And, if any of us have been at a startup that's sort of going through growth, that it can be quite painful because you have certain ways of working or organizing or planning, and then you double the size of the team and everything breaks and you have to kind of redo it. And so I wonder how much of, it doesn't surprise me in a way, that Google study, and I think we're all sort of trying to figure out, like, when do these things make us more productive? In some cases, they might be distracting us or doing other things. But one thing I've heard at the sort of smaller startup level is, I do think, it's all kind of anecdotal. I don't know how you would measure this, but like, teams of 2, 3, maybe 4 people are currently building products that are, if you saw it from the outside, you'd be like, oh, I assume there must be like a 10 or 20% engineering team, and then you find out it's only 3 people. But it's like, maybe they're starting from day one with different assumptions. Then that's quite a different problem than like, okay, we're Google at a certain size, we have a certain way of doing things, we do code reviews in this way, and then you bolt on AI and not much changes. I wonder how much it's like we're all sort of doing lots of little experiments, and some people are figuring things out more than others, or is it something fundamental? I don't know. It's like you're probably.
Yeah, I think it's clear that teams are getting smaller, and there's good reason to get smaller when the output of every individual on the team is able to increase so dramatically. You don't need as many people to build what you needed to build before. coding agents hit the scene. At the same time, and the roles are changing meaningfully, right? We now have like design engineer, and the PM can build prototypes, and the engineers are covering, like, I don't hear a whole lot about like back end and front end engineers anymore, right? Like, you're just an engineer, or kind of all just builders, but it's clear that there's still a diversity of perspectives required to build something. And like someone who 3 years ago was a designer is going to approach things differently than someone who 3 years ago was a back end engineer. And that's a good thing. Like, we need those different perspectives. I don't think this vision of like the one person $1 billion company, maybe it'll happen. Maybe it already has. I don't think that's the future of product development, because one person, I don't care how augmented you are, simply doesn't have what political scientist Scott Page calls the ensemble of wisdom required to see around all the corners that you need to build a great product. It's really hard to build a great product. And so I think teams are getting smaller, and they should probably. But the coordination headwind and the need to get everyone in a shared mental model about what we've built and why remains. And part of the challenge is that those of us building the technology and these products are becoming increasingly distanced from it. So, I think before agents hit the scene, we had really like 3 big problems that I've seen in my career. And I've spent 15 years working on cross-functional product teams across a whole bunch of different industries, and ultimately ended up consulting with a lot of these teams focused on the core problem of team alignment, because that was the bottleneck. And I'm seeing it get worse now. So one issue was exclusion. So I don't love the technical, non-technical frame of dividing teams up, but there is some value in it, I suppose. So, the team's source of truth is the code base. You can't argue with prod, right? The code is the thing. Your first immediate problem is that half the team, namely the designers and most of the PMs, cannot read the source of truth. They don't have that skill set. They have other skill sets. They are closer to the user in meaningful ways. And so there's an exclusion problem around the source of truth. Now, today, agents have created some distance between even the engineers and the code, such that that source of truth may not be fully understood by the engineers. We're getting to a point where like nobody understands how the program works. And you guys probably know, I think it was 1985, Peter Nahr wrote Programming as Theory Building. And it's a paper that we at Primitive are very inspired by. And his basic argument was the code is not the thing. The valuable thing is the mental model that we share as engineers about how the program actually works and the reason that it works that way. And this is why it's so painful for an engineering team when one of the engineers leaves the team. And so that shared understanding is breaking down in very meaningful ways, because there was already an exclusion problem. Now nobody understands the code, and that becomes a real challenge, because code is not just something that we generate; it's something that we maintain over long periods of time and in increasingly complex applications. The second challenge is, in part because of those, we get fragmentation. So the what of the code and the why are distinct, right? The code, yes, we try to write code such that it is self-explanatory, but that only goes so far in the real world. And so we try to write documentation, and we try to keep that documentation up to date, and we try to include product and user and business reasons in that documentation that kind of becomes fragmented around the code itself. So it lives in Notion documents, and it lives in Slack threads, and it lives in emails, and it lives in our heads. And that fragmentation was, by the way, a real challenge. Today, a lot of the thinking of the why behind the code, it's worse than fragmented. It is ephemeral, because it gets siphoned off into context windows for coding agents that disappear the moment that we close the terminal window, as opposed to going to our teammates. So I think the exclusion problem is getting worse. The fragmentation problem is getting worse. And then, because there is such a rapid velocity of code generation happening, nobody even tries to document anymore. Like, documentation is just, forget about it. We don't even bother. And so the why behind the code kind of gets just lost completely. And in larger orgs, especially, I think in small orgs too, but in larger orgs, it becomes a real problem, because the why, the documentation of the why that does persist, it goes stale immediately. And this happened before, but now it really happens. I spoke to, I won't name the company, but I spoke to an engineer at a FANG company, a big tech company recently, who told me that he would estimate on his team between 20 and 40% of anybody's time is spent either keeping documentation up to date, and documents being anything around the code, the Figma files, the PRDs, et cetera, trying to keep them up to date or in agreement with each other, or executing on documentation like a spec that was out of date. And therefore, the time is wasted because the wrong thing was built. 20 to 40% of anyone's time is spent on that. And it's all downstream of the fact that we can't keep all of the why up to date with the velocity of change. So this this sort of constellation of problems is what we're trying to address at Primitive, because I think it's getting a lot worse.
Well, so
Cool.
based on that, I'm like, why isn't the future, 1 or 2 person teams? Because, yeah, talk to me more. Why not limit it at 3 people? We had the 2 pizza rule before. Why not the
Yeah, what's the new rule?
2 burrito rule?
Agents don't eat pizza. What's the optimal team size now? Both humans and agents,
Yeah. I do think the optimal team size is smaller. Like that's very real. I don't know if it's just 2 people. Maybe it is. Maybe we're headed in that direction. But we also need to keep the agents on the same page with us, right? And I think the problem kind of just it's the same problem. It just moves from being mostly humans to maybe mostly agents that still need a shared, up-to-date source of truth to work from, and they need to understand, I think, the reason behind the code, because it helps them explore. It helps them both be divergent and convergent in ways that align with our high-level goals. And so I think the problem remains either way. But I do think it's likely true that teams, kind of just they're going to get smaller. They are getting smaller. It's happening.
I like your point about kind of like just a diversity of perspectives needed to build a great product. And, some like the roles are blurring, but maybe that's one way to think about it. Is I kind of agree that it's just unlikely that you're going to have one unicorn person that somehow is able to like care about all the things that you would need to care about. And so I wonder, for me, as I think about, we have a 3-person team now, what should we add next? I think even just when I think about like the engineering side, it does feel like you want some specialization probably of like, who is kind of playing the role of like design and thinking about, prompting agents in that direction, but also kind of building processes on like, how do we have a high bar in like this particular area? I probably want someone else who's thinking about like security and making sure that we, are designing our ACLs in the right way, that we're not going to like, have an instance. Unlikely those are the same person. Maybe they are. But then like also, who's really kind of the voice of the customer and ideally talking to them and has kind of empathy and intuition about their problems. And so I don't know if you think about like, on a big product team today, we needed a lot of engineers just to like write all of the code, but we had people kind of maybe wearing different hats in those directions that, maybe their titles weren't necessarily product designer or, back-end engineer or whatever. But like, I wonder if, now still, I can imagine just like a 3, 4, 5-person team with people kind of playing those different roles that are then amplified by agents would still probably make a better product than even a 1 or 2-person team where just like who's, some of those things are just not being thought of at all, probably.
Right. I think that's true. And I think what it boils down to ultimately is, the agents change what we can do. They don't necessarily change what we know. Sure, they can answer questions, but they can't always tell us what the right question to ask is.
Totally.
And so there's still a diversity of knowledge required about what's the right question to ask ultimately. And I think Ade over at Cloudflare mentioned this recently, maybe in one of our group chats or something like that. But he said, we were kind of having this conversation. He explained that as like, well, there's also just like the cognitive attitude that someone who has a design background is going to bring to the table versus someone who's an engineer. Like those are fundamentally different cognitive attitudes that are going to zero in on different concerns, both of which are incredibly important. And that is the case whether they are all agentically amplified or not. They're going to direct their agents in different ways towards different concerns.
Totally.
And so, I think it's still a requirement. I also think that humans just like working with humans. Like this vision of the single person $1 billion company sounds pretty
lonely.
sad. Cool. Enjoy your $1 billion in your lonely mansion, I suppose. But I think humans like working with each other, actually. It's hard and it has complications, but I think ultimately most of us find it satisfying.
I'm going to steal this from my friend Yuri, but his thing is that the 1-person $1 billion company has already happened and it was J.K. Rowling. And
that's good.
She created a movement. It's a religion.
But no, I mean, I do think you're right. I think that the actual humanity it is fun, right? It is fun on some level. The goal here is to be fulfilled, not just to make things.
Kasey, I'm curious, when I met you, you have kind of a user research background among your other backgrounds and talents. I think you were doing maybe on the Google Maps team when I first met you. I'm curious if that kind of research mentality has been helpful, kind of trying to figure out this confusing new world where you probably, we're trying to figure out humans and their problems, and now we have sort of agents which are not humans but like
Hmm.
have certain behaviors, and then you put sort of humans and agents together. Like, have you found that kind of user research background helpful in trying to study this like new type of strange team that we now have?
Yeah. Yeah, massively, because one, we're building for cross-functional teams. I have not occupied every role on a cross-functional team. Like, I am comfortable calling myself technical, but I am not an engineer. There are many significantly better engineers than I would ever be. To build for it like a genuinely cross-functional product, we have to understand the perspective. We have to develop a strong theory of mind for every role on the team. We have to think the way that they think, and we have to understand their particular concerns and how they intersect with those of others. And so I think there's an incredibly deep exercise in theory of mind, which I think of as like the core substrate of UX research, for example, is like how do we as an organization develop a theory of mind for our user? What are their mental models? What are their pain points? What context are they operating within? And so I think like that is certainly critical for us. What was my other point? I think too, the problems that we're trying to address are very human. They are human problems, and they're old human problems. How do you get a bunch of people on the same page moving in the same direction effectively and efficiently, which I believe begins with aligning them around a shared mental model, maybe even a story about where they're going and why. But we're seeing a lot of the same dynamics apply to agents. Agents are, you can think of them as the derivative of our language, which is a derivative of our thoughts and a derivative of our mental models and a derivative of our behavior. So, I don't think I'm pointing out anything novel to identify that agents behave a little bit like humans. Not perfectly like humans, but certainly a bit. And, I'm seeing a lot of people, they'll build out their like very Baroque, complex agent orchestration systems. And you'll notice they're kind of reinventing from first principles designs that were invented decades ago in organizational management sciences, right? And so I think the learning about how humans behave is very translatable into the way that agents behave. Not always, but in meaningful ways. And it's a really interesting problem to figure out, okay, where are the lines there and what can we apply and what can we not? But yeah, I do think the research background, to my mind, we're in an environment where understanding our users and this new affordance in the technology that we have available to us, it lets us address new problems in new ways. But you kind of have to hold both. Like, I think when I was working with product teams as a consultant, I would lean a lot on this very, very simple framework, which you can think of as like a tripartite Venn diagram, which has the user as one circle, and we can kind of model them as a bundle of mental models and pain points and needs. The technology on another, which is, you can think of it as like a bundle of affordances and constraints. And every technology has constraints. I think us in technology, we sometimes forget that. We get really excited about what it can do, and we forget kind of where the bounds of what it can do are. And then really importantly, because that's sort of like a naive HCI model, but the really important thing is that there is a context that relationship happens within. And that context introduces risks. When I was working on world scale AR at Google Maps, the context of that interaction was a city. It was a streetscape. And we had a technology that kind of demanded your attention while you were walking through the city. Well, there's a context where there's like semi trucks flying by. And so there are real risks in that context that absolutely have to be considered, not to mention like more mundane stuff. Like if you're holding up your phone at this particular angle outside, the sun is going to glare on it in a different way. And so we have to think about contrast in our UI differently. And then there's also incentives in that context. So like if you're building enterprise software, but you don't have any model of an understanding about how people are promoted or demoted in that company, you don't understand the game you're a part of, right?
Mhm,
Because those incentives are enormous and could have a major impact on if people want to use your product, whether they do it, how they would buy it, if they would buy it, et cetera. And so I think like it's a really interesting time to just be applying that same old framework to this new technology and the way it's changing teams. Actually, James,
Nice.
it calls to mind, you had a beautiful post a while back about the Gatling gun. Can we talk about Gatling guns?
Yeah, let's talk about Gatling guns. Yeah.
I'd love to hear in your voice, like how you applied that mental model. Cause I've thought a lot about it and I think it goes in interesting directions.
Well, so
It was a good. You should share it here, James. For the.
I'll drop it into the show notes.
Post.
Yeah. So I got this from this book from Jordan Schneider, who does an awesome podcast called China Talk, and it's The Social History of the Machine Gun. And it basically talks about how the technology evolves from the Gatling gun in like 1860 through World War I, and all of the ways that in fits and starts, militaries struggled to adopt the technology. And I came out of it, I thought it was thinking about AI basically the entire time I was reading the book, and came out of it just shocked to the degree that it was hard for people to learn how to change their values in order to adopt the technology, and specifically the way that you needed to get the technology and the training and the tactics and the cultural values to all align to get the value. There are a couple other things that I learned from it, but that was the big one that came out of it. Really, it changed how war happened. Previously, you wanted to get everybody into a line and to charge so that you could break through. And in that situation, you need coordination. You need everybody to run together. Part of being brave, part of being a good soldier is staying in the line and going straight ahead. And then all of a sudden with machine guns, you want covering fire. You want this kind of like, I mean, I'm not a gun person, but like there's a different flow to it. And it was kind of impossible for some people to learn that. I mean, so anyway, that was the
I find it so fascinating because I mean, to your point, we are finding ourselves in a moment where we had an existing social structure, and I mean social in like the most general sense. An organization structures itself around pre-existing technologies and workflows, or organizes itself fundamentally and culturally, to your point, around a particular workflow. And then a new technology hits, and it's like, that is, you know, if you get in a line walking up against a Gatling gun, you're toast. And I think that we're looking at a very similar restructuring around technology happening right now. To your point, I think it's a really sharp one. It sent me down a related rabbit hole about like what happened in the aftermath of the invention of the Gatling gun. So thank you for that. And what I learned was, you know, and I think you called this out, it took like 50 years for us to kind of figure out how to adapt to this new technology, given that humans are humans and unfortunately we're still going to have war. And the struggle and the story of the struggle was so fascinating because, of course, you know, Gatling gun is invented, World War I comes around, immediately we're like, well, I guess we better dig some trenches. So we put ourselves in trenches. And then, of course, the nth order effect of that is, well, we're hidden from the Gatling gun now. That's good. We also cannot see each other or our commander, and our commander cannot see us. And so now there's an enormous coordination problem and communication problem on the battlefield. And so they tried all sorts of stuff to address this. They tried like, okay, well, let's like string out telephone wires across the battlefield. Well, obviously that gets blown apart by artillery like immediately. They sent runners across the battlefield, which of course was a death sentence. Do not want to be picked as the runner. Then they said, okay, well, let's send dogs and pigeons. That did not go very well, as you could probably imagine. And this is like the chaos of this was like part of the reason that World War I is remembered as, I mean, they're all awful wars, but like World War I is like remembered as particularly brutal and grueling and terrible. And it was only once the portable radio was invented that they kind of figured out, okay, great. Now we can actually coordinate, send you guys over. We can be reactive, responsive, adaptive, and like move in intelligent ways on the battlefield. We're not just like buried in a hole hoping, you know, that this goes well. And so that's like one of the main reasons that World War II looked so different than World War I.
Super interesting.
With like the invention of the portable radio. And so at Primitive, I mean, I think a lot about what we're building as that portable radio. What is the coordination mechanism by which we can operate around a shared understanding of what's happening in an environment where otherwise we are sending dogs into the battlefield, you know?
That's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
That sucks if you were born at a time between we'd invented the machine gun, then we'd invented the trench. Okay, that we figured out trenches, but we
Yeah.
don't yet have the radio. It's just like that. Your life sucked. That
Yep.
we lost a whole generation in just dismal trenches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can be even more concrete about it too. I think the sort of trench warfare and sending out dogs right now looks on the ground with product teams. It looks like an avalanche of PRs that some poor eng lead has to review that nobody understands. They're 3,000 lines of code each that the person who wrote the PR doesn't understand what's in it. And your best hope, your dog that you're sending out is like a code review bot to go find some bugs.
Mm-hmm.
But like that really doesn't help you understand what's happening in the code. It doesn't make sure that the code matches the upstream intent that your team had developed to address it. And so I think, that's what it ends up looking like on the ground right now.
There's a funny symmetry there too, because this reminds me of there's an engineering leader at Google. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember which one. It was at like a search all hands, I think, where they had done one of these like surveys, like I think the Google guys surveys where they ask everybody various things. And one of the things that, people were complaining about was how much technical debt, we had. And so that's just like, fun topic that engineers always like to focus on. And I remember this sort of like little like pep talk where the guy got up and he's like, this is like one of the more like friendly engineering organizations in the world. We actually do care about this. And, but he said that, but he made this funny point about like, everyone is sort of complaining about the technical debt that everyone else is creating. But like, where do you guys think it's coming from? It's like, you're sitting in traffic and you're like, I hate the traffic jam, but like you're there. Right. And so I think like, it's like everyone loves to be the creator, just, wow, I just made 10 PRs. This is amazing. I'm so productive. And no one wants to be on the receiving end of like these crappy PRs. And I think every sort of role is experiencing this, where I think it's, traditionally engineering was kind of a gatekeeping function, but not for bad reasons. Like they carry the pagers, like they get yelled at if the site goes down. There's an accountability that means that like they care about quality that other people can't see. And I think design, practice like restraint and like, every feature should like earn its place in the product. And now everyone's like, hey, I can design, like, I'm doing Lovable and Figma Mix and that's so like I think it's hard right now for the gatekeepers to be saying no to things when everyone is just feeling like they could just generate all of this stuff, and we haven't yet found kind of any new equilibrium. But
this is why about 80% of the time I feel like we're gonna have this mashing of roles, and that people are gonna become more interchangeable, and the teams are gonna get smaller. And then about 20% of the time, I'm like, actually, it's gonna stay exactly the same. You're still gonna have a designer, you're still gonna have a PM, you're still gonna have an engineer, and they're, because I do think I feel like having a high quality design colleague is 10x more important than it was before, because you need them to create a structure that other people can fill in. And I feel like really, really talented designers aren't telling you, put the button here. They're giving you a structure where it is obvious to put the button. And making where to put the button. And then similarly, I think having a engineering leader who is thinking about structures and code quality and how to make different parts of the product accessible is an enabling function for all of the people that have feature ideas. Because if you don't have the right scalability infrastructure in place, you just run into bottlenecks, right? That you're not going to be able to get around. And so anyway, there's a somewhat to your point, Kasey, we're back here again. Do we like it? Yeah, because we're still here.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to redesign the team from first principles today, I think, this is personal opinion, you would want one person whose job is to design and maintain the technical architecture of the product, one person whose job is to be wholly focused on the user and their needs and the way that they think and interact with it, and one person whose job is to think about the business and how it gets monetized and how value gets captured and generated. Which I think is kind of just reinventing the existing three-legged stool, but from first principles. Like maybe it's a little different. I would like it to be a little different, actually. I don't think the existing three-legged stool is necessarily ideal even in the old world, but I do think we would reinvent something more or less like what we have from first principles if we were to do that exercise, deeply.
I liked the tripartite Venn diagram you were describing. Like the context seems like sort of a nice one that we don't talk about as much as we should. I feel like another one there, you talked about incentives. And I think another thing that we don't talk about as much as we should in the tech industry is like business models also, which are often not talked about explicitly. And in some companies, it's even like, yep, let's not talk about that. But like that, I think sort of sets incentives in a way that if you if you pick a team like the search team or the YouTube team or something, and you just like did a ship of Theseus, like we're going to just like replace all those people with other people, the business model there somehow would like recreate those incentives. And so I think you see it. And I think that's one of the things that's making it so confusing right now at all levels as we introduce this new input, and like the business models are all getting shaken up. And some people are like, oh, SaaS apocalypse, SaaS is dead. And then others like, well, maybe not. I think at the macro scale, I think I saw something from Dario maybe yesterday or today. I don't know where he was talking, but he was sort of talking about this choice that Anthropic made to sell to businesses and how that is a very different choice than, OpenAI is serving a lot of free users. And it's almost like whatever the people at those companies, whatever their intentions, like that pulls you in a very different direction. If you need to serve a whole bunch of free consumers, how do we pay for that versus, okay, we sell to businesses. And I think, some of what's sort of confusing as well is that agents, they're not like a substitute for people exactly, but they're sort of like in some ways, some ways they're augmenting us as a tool. In other ways, they're maybe, I don't have to hire as many people. And so I think it's going to, some of the sort of industries like, legal or, financial auditing or things where there's like an established business model, like the billable hour. And now it's like, okay, so now there's this new tool that can make lawyers more efficient, but like, does that go against the billable hour? Are they just getting better margins? Like there's also competition where people are like, hey, why am I still paying you just, the same amount as before, even though you're more efficient? So I think that's what's like making this kind of quite a confusing era, is that we don't have much clarity yet on like what the new business models are. It's disrupting old ones, and we're all trying to figure it out. And like, we don't know what the incentives really even are yet, how things are going to shake out. Revenue's ramping very quickly in many different areas. Nobody quite knows like who's gonna end up with something durable. What do margins look like? We don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the most foggy part of the current landscape. We know that we have hit the end of zero marginal cost software. I don't know that we know what's next. I feel like we're still just trying to figure out fundamentally how this new cost structure works, where the value capture lives. I think it's kind of exciting, to be honest, because it shakes things up so much that it creates a lot of opportunities for new entrants and dynamism in a way that I think is inherently valuable for innovation. I think it's really inherently valuable for the economy in general. Not to go on a total tangent, but I think free markets are a good idea and we should try it. Like monopolies, to the degree that they exist, dampen economic growth and opportunity. I think it's a foggy moment, but it's also an exciting one.
The other thing that I hold on to in there is I think you want to be long model quality as you're coming up with your design. I think the CEO of Spellbook made the comment that like 2 years ago, everyone didn't want to be a thin wrapper on OpenAI, and it turned out that actually being a thin wrapper was ideal, because if you actually found a place where being a wrapper was useful, you've gotten all of these free benefits that if you invested in this really complicated RAG setup and all of this stuff, that now you're like just a burnt money. So it's another one in there that as I come back to, okay, in the fog, like you got to find a couple of things to hold on to. It's like, okay, how do I stay long model quality? Because it doesn't seem like that's going to slow down. And I do think we're going to continue to live in a physical world, right? Like that, the laws of physics are going to still exist. The laws of humans are going to still kind of operate in their same way.
It's a nice point.
I don't want to keep you too long, Kasey, but where can people find out more? I mean, you have a lot of really interesting stuff. We haven't gotten to see anything. Maybe you're not quite ready yet. I don't want to push you, but where can people, if people are like, Kasey has figured it out, I want to know when I can get more, where do the people find you?
So you can go to getprimitive.ai and get on our wait list. Would love for people to like get on that so they can hear the updates. We have a newsletter as well. You are welcome to sign up for. I think the provocation I will offer to kind of give a glimpse into what we're building before I sign off is, if English is a new programming language, then why isn't your code base in English? If it was, your whole team could read it and write it. And I think that would help a lot on this coordination problem that we've been discussing. And if your code base was English, it would be trivial to combine the what, which is the current code base, with the why, which is all the flurry of documentation around it. And so that is what we are building at Primitive. Really appreciate it.
You have to come back on when it's live. You can give us a demo.
We'll do it. I love that. Thank you. This has been fun, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining. Always good to see you.
Cheers.